So in this video, we're going to break down all 4 types of triads in under 5 minutes. Let's talk about it.
So the first term we're going to need to know in order to talk about this is a semitone. A semitone is just the next note. So for example, from C to C sharp, or if you play a note on the guitar and you go to the very next fret, that would be an example of a semitone. The second term we need to define is a triad. A triad is basically a series of 3 notes stacked in thirds. So a first, a third, a fifth. Because we're going up a third each time, going up a third goes from 1 to 3, and then 3 skipping over 4 to 5.
Maybe the most important triad of all and the most common chord type of all is a major chord or major triad.
Every single major chord is a perfect first, or the root note, a major third, and then a perfect fifth. So if we're going to create a D major chord, the easiest part is the root note, or the perfect first, and that's just the name of the chord. Since we're talking about a D major chord, the root note is a D. Next we have our major third. A major third is 4 semitones, so we need to count up 4 semitones to get to our major third. So from D, we have D sharp, E, F, F sharp. Since that's 4 semitones, we know that F sharp is our third in our triad. Next, we need to figure out the fifth of the chord. A perfect fifth is 7 semitones, so we need to count up 7 semitones to find out what our fifth is, and that will complete our chord. So we start with D, and then we go D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. So A would be our fifth.
Probably the second most common chord type of all is a minor triad or a minor chord. So what is a minor triad?
A minor triad is made up of your root note and then a minor third and a perfect fifth. The root note of your chord is going to be the name of the chord. So for example, if it's a D minor chord, the root note is a D. Next, we need the minor third of our chord. And a minor third is 3 semitones. So we count up 3 semitones from D in order to figure out what our second note in the triad is. So we start with D, and then we go D sharp, E, F, because there is no E sharp. So F is actually going to be our second note in the triad. And then the third note in the triad is a perfect fifth. A perfect fifth would be 7 semitones, because a perfect fifth is always a distance of 7 semitones. So we start with D, go D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. So the third note in our triad, or our minor chord, is an A.
And we also have diminished triads.
Specifically, we have our root note, and then we have a minor third, and we have a diminished fifth. So let's take a D diminished chord. In a D diminished chord, the root note is exactly what the name of the chord is. So the root note would be a D. Next, we need to figure out what the third of the chord is. Because it's a diminished chord, we know that it will be a minor third. A minor third is 3 semitones. So we just count up 3 semitones from D to figure out what the third of our chord is. So starting with D, we go up to D sharp, and then E, F. So our third of our D diminished chord is an F. Next, we need to figure out our fifth. Because it's a diminished chord, we have a diminished fifth. And this is a diminished fifth from the root. So we go back to our root, and then we have to count up 6 semitones, because a diminished fifth interval is 6 semitones. So we start with our D, and then go up D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp. So we know that our D diminished triad is a D, an F, and a G sharp. But because it is a triad and we know it's stacked in thirds, we should know that our letters we have are D, F, and A. So our G sharp should actually be labeled A flat. So technically, the notes in our chord are D, F, and A flat.
And finally, we have augmented triads.
An augmented chord is basically just your root note, a major third, and an augmented fifth. So as long as we can figure out what a major third is and what an augmented fifth is, we can figure out in any key or for any chord what our augmented chord is. So let's look at a D augmented chord. Our root note, like any other triad, is just the name of the chord. So since it's a D augmented chord, we know that our root note is a D. Next, we need to figure out what the third is. In the case of an augmented chord, we know that our third is a major third. We also should know that a major third is 4 semitones. So we just count up 4 semitones from our root note, and that will give us the third in our triad. So in the case of a D augmented chord, we go D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp. So F sharp is the third in our D augmented triad. Finally, we need to figure out the fifth of our chord. Because it's an augmented chord, we know that our fifth will be an augmented fifth. An augmented fifth is 8 semitones, so we need to count 8 semitones from the root note, in this case a D, in order to figure out what the fifth of our chord is. So we start with D, and then D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp. So A sharp would be the fifth in our D augmented triad. So now we figured out that a D augmented triad is a D, an F sharp, and an A sharp.
Hopefully this was helpful to you. If it was, something else you'll likely find helpful is my free guide on the 4 pillars of music theory that every songwriter needs to know. We break down intervals, keys, chords, and chord progressions within the context of keys, which are what I think are the 4 most important things to understand about music theory for your songwriting. So if this was helpful, that will certainly be helpful for you. Be sure to check it out. My free gift to you, link in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll talk to you in the next one.